And David Kimmel is with us now, one of the two fellow Republicans challenging incumbent Janet DUPREY in the new 115th Assembly District. Nice to have you. Welcome.
Nice to have you, Tom. How have you been?
I am well, thank you.
Good.
So why are you running?
Well, Tom, I'm running because I want to get something done finally, and I don't think we've been getting much done at all under the incumbent. And I've got a few things that I want to accomplish to do that.
Why challenge the incumbent? The Republicans have had Janet DUPREY there for a number of years. Why, from within the own party, challenge her now?
That's a valid question, and the reason is I just think she's doing a poor job. And there's too much at stake to let that continue. We can't keep marking time. It's been 6 years. I don't think she's ever articulated an actual plan to get things moving. And that's what I want to do. I want to see job creation. I want to see economic growth. And I'm tired of just watching the failure coming out of this district.
So what do you do? How can you make a difference where she can't? It's most likely that as a Republican, you would still be part of the minority. It doesn't appear that the Republicans will gain the majority status in the Assembly. So how can you make a difference where Janet can't?
Well, certainly leadership experience will be a factor, and I have a different type of leadership experience than Janet, but I think it'll be relevant here. Mine is primarily military and business ownership. But I also think we need a new approach that will help. As I listen to and analyze the people that we've sent to Albany over the last several years from this district, what we frequently hear is this sort of mantra that they don't understand we're different. I think it's time to stop positing things in terms of how comparison and contrast. I think we need to approach things from the perspective that we actually have much in common. And so as I formulate policy, I want to do so with the approach that what we need here is also good for you in Manhattan or in Buffalo. And I think that approach will help. The other thing too is we have to send somebody to Albany who has a plan. I mean, after 6 years, what's her plan? If you're running for office and you can't articulate, here's what I want to accomplish in my first term and here's why, I don't think you should be running. And if you're running for re-election and you still haven't been able to articulate that, I'd have to say the same thing's true. You
talk about working with assembly members from New York City and from Buffalo. That's a big challenge.
Sure.
And many would maybe suggest that an incumbent would have more experience and be sitting on committees and be able to accomplish more doing that than a new challenger or somebody who comes along who hasn't done this before. But so how would you try to forge that relationship? I mean, Albany can be very partisan. I mean, we're seeing an era now of where Democrats and Republicans seem to be working together, but how as a Republican would you be able to accomplish a lot of this in other areas of the state with representatives who are very Democratic?
That's a great question. I think a lot has to do with the reputation you establish. As luck would have it, when I was a young Marine, I started out in the Marines, I went into the Army later. I built a reputation for problem solving, and in fact I had a nickname. It was MacGyver. I don't know if there are any copyright problems, okay? But
that's interesting.
Yeah, no, and along the way I invented things that helped improve our mission. I invented processes that helped, and that's a reputation that traveled with me for 23 years. If I go to Albany, I'm convinced that if I actually establish a reputation as a problem solver, if I actually establish a reputation as a no-nonsense guy, I can get more done. And one of the incumbent's problems, frankly, is that she has a reputation for, leftist, liberal social policy. That is her reputation. She can't run from it, and that's problematic. She's not the go-to person for job creation or the economy, but she's the go-to person for everything else. And so I do think that's a big part of it, Tom.
And when you talk about liberal social policies, certainly gay marriage is probably the biggest. You were disappointed with her vote to legalize gay marriage in New York.
Oh, sure, and I can hear her now saying, well, Dave's just got to get over it. It's the law of the land. But in 2011, before it was the law of the land, she did an interview here in our district, in the Champlain Weekly, I believe it was, in which she said, we got to move beyond gay marriage. The same exact week, she was in Albany, and she wrote an editorial for the Times-Union, the same exact week, in which she practically begged her fellow legislators to vote for gay marriage. I mean, if I get the mouthpiece of the Times-Union that's 3 to 6 times as large as our local paper, depending on whether it's a Sunday edition or not. I'm going to be talking about my passion. My passion is jobs in the economy. So I was disappointed with her because she continues to do that sort of thing, and I don't think it's helping anybody. I'm also disappointed with her because I think it's a pattern that continues, not just with gay marriage, with other legislation as well, like Genda, which is something she's supporting this year. And here's the other thing too. 88% of people that were polled in the Marist poll just before that vote, 88% of all New Yorkers said that it shouldn't even be on the agenda. That's all New Yorkers. Why was it? Well, it was fueled by special interest money. You can't also claim, as she did and still does, that she wants to reform things in Albany when she is one of the largest partakers of one of the biggest special interests in the last 10 years. And so I think I'm disappointed by those things. I think the voters are too. It's nothing against the population group that she voted for. It's really strictly the fact that she's doing her own thing and not what her constituents sent her for.
Well, you talk about jobs being your top priority. Yeah. How do you create them? How unemployment running 10, 11% here in Clinton County for a number of years now. Obviously, for many voters, jobs in the economy is priority number one. So how do you make a difference? What's your plan?
Well, here's my plan. First, you have to recognize that this didn't happen in a vacuum. When Ms. DUPREY took office in 2006, we were sitting at 5%. So for 3 years before the economic crash, the trajectory of unemployment grew, and it continues to grow along the same trajectory. And as you said, it's almost double what it was. If she doesn't feel accountable for doubling the unemployment in this district, she's certainly accountable for having no solution. So what's my solution? This is my platform. I've listened to the business community, Tom, and I know some things about history. And so I'm focusing on transportation, communication. Both those two things are very important, and they've been a part of every economic breakthrough in world history. And as far as communication goes, I'm really an expert in that area.
So infrastructure. You're saying we need to invest in infrastructure.
Yeah, particularly communication, but there are also transportation issues we have to address. And I've come up with some innovative ways to do that. I want to reduce the total number of health insurance mandates. DUPREY actually co-sponsored the latest, number 57. We have more mandates than 45 other states, and we're among the top 3 most expensive states for health insurance. For over a decade, our businesses have identified health insurance mandates as something that has put them at a competitive disadvantage. So it's time to listen. Let's do something. Now, you mentioned, how do you work with sort of a mixed crowd? Well, here's a good example. If I waltz into Albany and I say, well, I want to just cut half the health insurance mandates, let's be honest, Speaker Silver will rightly say, hey, go sit down in the corner. And that's not really how you get business done. And so I've developed a plan in which we use about half as a baseline. And then we introduce market factors so that people can actually choose. Let's say you're a health insurance provider. You would have to have a Cadillac plan that included all the mandates. I don't want to look anybody in the eye and say, your mandate's not important. So you'd have to have at least one plan. But then you'd have a range of plans that people could choose using market-based choices, cost and so forth, that would include the other mandates. So that's an example of one way I would look at the problem. I can hear DUPREY saying, well, which ones are you going to cut? That's not what I'm talking about. I want to make that real clear. The other thing is that we must do something about Medicaid. And so the fourth pillar, if you will, of my plan is Medicaid reform. And this is another area where I recognize that on the left there are people in Albany who actually think we should have more Medicaid entitlement. Medicaid is driving property taxes up. It's driving people out of their home, and we have to do something about it. And so my initial plan in reforming Medicaid is attacking fraud, waste, and abuse.
And you say there's a lot. It runs rampant.
There is. If you look at somebody like SEIU, they say it's about 3%. That's $1.5 billion a year. The New York Times says it's 5 to 10%. That is a big number. And as it turns out, There is a stomach, there is an appetite in Albany for going after fraud, waste, and abuse. It hasn't been done well, but we can build a bipartisan coalition around that without even touching entitlements, you know, the individual entitlements that so many people hold so dearly.
And you also talk about transportation.
Yeah.
Rail, fixing roads and bridges. How do you see improving the transportation infrastructure?
Well, my plan opens things up a little bit in transportation. I want to create the opportunity for private entrepreneurs with deep pockets to say, for instance, I want to build a factory. I would like to add, in the case of Plattsburgh, a 5th exit straight to my factory. I want to make things like that possible where they're a little more difficult. The other thing is I want to introduce transportation legislation that requires that we identify the maintenance costs long term. If the military buys a tank, I got to tell you, being a career military man, we don't just buy the tank, we actually allocate funds for the axles that are going to break in the first 5 years, the munitions we'll need in the first 5 years, and so forth. We need to do something more like that in New York. And it's not the people in transportation, it's the politicians. I'll give you an example. Tappan Zee Bridge is being rebuilt, or they're going to be rebuilding it. As you know, they've already made the decision that because of funding, they don't have a mass transit lane and they don't have a high occupancy vehicle lane. So even though we knew those would be factors and that hundreds of thousands of people rely on those things to move back and forth and go to work, we didn't plan for it. Now we find out quietly that they're raising the current rates 40% because they don't have enough money to pay for the basic bridge. What a horrible oversight of something we could have identified 60 years ago as a potential problem.
The governor would say adding that for mass transit would double the cost to about $10 billion, and that there just isn't the appetite among toll payers and taxpayers to double the bill.
Yeah, he would say that and he would be correct, and that's where my plan comes in place. You see, the legislation I spoke about first regarding transportation would enable a private entrepreneur to say, I'll tell you what, I'll build that mass transit lane. I just want to share a part of the reward for having it there.
And we're seeing that in Canada. That's proposed for a big east-west highway up in the state of Maine.
Yeah.
You see that for projects like the Tappan Zee and potentially something like the Rooftop Highway? Bringing in a private partnership to bring in that capital.
Yeah.
Then would you have to charge a toll for the rooftop so that the private interests can get their money back?
Oh yeah, yeah. But once you introduce market forces, a lot of these things smooth out themselves. We may find that there's not even a private entrepreneurial taste for a rooftop highway once we make that a possibility, but the same legislation could just as easily make the Route 11 corridor a little easier to travel with commerce.
So you haven't come out saying, I definitely want the rooftop 4-lane interstate. You're saying it could also be, as proposed, a better east-west highway and improvements to U.S.
That's
Route
right.
11.
The important thing is to introduce market forces and give us more possibilities, more things in our toolkit to make sure transportation is running smoothly because commerce requires it. By the way, I mentioned the Tappan Zee for a specific reason. The Chamber actually put out an alert that they're trying to raise the rates 40%. People don't often think about it. It's not just people from this region who are traveling across the Tappan Zee to vacation in New York. Our 400-year trading partner in Canada relies on that. Can you imagine what it's going to do to commerce? It's going to be a lot easier for Canadians facing a 40% hike on the Tappan Zee to move their commerce east and west across the 401 through the Ambassador Bridge and into Detroit. And that's a privately owned bridge, by the way.
In the past couple of years, it seems that lawmakers have made some progress. I mean, voters have been frustrated for a number of years saying Albany's dysfunctional, but in the past couple of years, they have been able to pass a budget on time now for the past 2 years, tackle the deficit, deal with the deficit. Are they still spending way too much money, in your opinion, and focusing on the wrong priorities?
Well, they are focusing on the wrong priorities to some extent, and they are spending a little too much money. But we have to look at things a little differently. If you look at things from the accountant perspective, you know, if you've ever tried to grow a company, sometimes that accountant is your best friend, and sometimes he'll drive you crazy. I mean, no offense to accountants, but you have to actually say, what is it we're trying to accomplish? An on-time budget is a must. It's actually required by law in New York State, and so it's deplorable when they can't do it. We must recognize that the governor was successful there in the last 2 years. But what are our goals? Has anybody ever stated that we would like New York to be at or near full employment? No. That is a good goal. When we have goals, when we have a vision, then we can thrive. In fact, there's an old Bible verse that says, when the people don't have vision, the people perish. I'm grossly paraphrasing it, but I think that's very true. And so that's actually like the fifth part of my campaign, and that is this overarching concept of an empire-sized vision to match the empire state that we are. And I think if we start thinking in terms of the great people of New York and the fact that as an economic force we could be and should be unstoppable, that will drive many of our decisions and change a lot of things for the better.
One of the big issues debated this past year, didn't pass, but it's been debated a number of years now, is raising the minimum wage. A number in the Assembly, a number of Democrats, the governor say it's time to raise the minimum wage. The other side, Senate Republicans, and many say it'll kill small business.
Yeah.
Where do you come down on
well,
this?
I'm already on the record with this, and I want to be consistent. I don't like minimum wage. I would have voted against it, and I think voters have a right to know that. And there's some reasons for that. One, there's no actual empirical evidence it's improved anything. If you're living on minimum wage, you're still poor. And two, it actually gives employers the opportunity to pay less than their employees are worth. If we strive for full employment, then the market can actually sort out wages. I'll give you an example. When I was in anti-terrorism in the capital region, my kids were still in high school. They're all grown now. And 2 of my children went into the workforce during that time. And we lived in Clifton Park in a little apartment, kept our home up here in CADYVILLE. Those kids never worked minimum wage. There was full employment in Clifton Park. There was a lot of pro-growth policy in place in the region, and they were able to set their own wage. We can do that anywhere. We just have to have the right policy in place, genuinely. We need a policy that promotes full employment for the people of the state. And I think that's a far better thing to promote than minimum wage, which has never proven to actually do anything to help pull people out of poverty.
Just a few months ago, New York launched a new ad campaign and a new commitment announced by the governor to be more business friendly. Has the state for a number of years been anti-business, and is this a step in the right direction, and is it a step that they need to continue to make in that direction?
Well, I think we had to declare to the rest of the world that we were open for business. I would support that on its face just simply because it's time that we say, hey world, look at us. Now we better back it up. And we haven't yet created the environment to back that up. Frankly, our property tax, even with the cap, they were already too high. We need mandate relief to back this up. One of my things, the health insurance mandate reform. The health insurance mandate reform would also be a way to open up businesses. And people have said, we're at a disadvantage because of this problem. So let's address the problem. Let's listen to the people who know, business owners.
You ran 2 years ago. This is your second run as a Conservative Party candidate. You wanted to run in the primary. There was a challenge to petitions, and so you ran as a Conservative Party candidate. If you don't win the primary this time around, will you look to run either as a Conservative Party candidate or as an independent and again make it a three-way race for November?
No, I won't. If I don't win the Republican primary, I'm backing out. I'm going back to my garden, growing my business, loving my wife, and seeing my grandkids as much as possible. Yeah. The truth is, even though I did exceptionally well, my numbers were the highest that we can find in at least 20 years. The truth of the matter is, without an R or a D next to your name, it's just not a bright thing to do.
David Kimmel, thank you very much for taking the time. Good luck in the primary, which is again September 13th, Thursday, September 13th. I should ask you about that real quickly, though. As a candidate, that's a tough day to have a primary. A Thursday is unusual for folks, and so that you're hopeful that people will get the word and get out and vote.
Yeah, we plan to get people out to vote, and make no mistake about it, we want our people there to vote. But obviously, Tom, at a different level, we should exercise this incredible right and vote. when you think about people who have to put their fingers in purple dye and they recognize the privilege of being able to vote, we should all be encouraging maximum participation. But yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens that day.
David Kimmel, thank you very much for taking the time.
Good seeing you again.